Hello, hello. Welcome, YouTubers, YouTube viewers. Coming off the heels of a great show last week. That was great with Michael Witkoff, Lies of the Freemasons. Um, we're following up with another good guest. Hello, ooh la la. This week on the history of the dissident right, the alt right and neo-reaction, we're going to talk to Clark Enderson. Really smart young guy. He makes it kind of a hobby and a point of study to research this. So let's get right started with that, and I'll give him a call.
Hello?
Hello, Mr. Enderson. How are you?
Hello, Michael. How are you? Can you hear me?
Good. I hear you loud and clear. How's life, man?
It's doing all right.
Doing all right. That's it. All right. Well, do you want to introduce yourself in a whatever fashion you'd like to?
Oh, yes. Well, I think I will introduce myself according to the topic I'm studying. So, I'm Clark Enderson. I've been of the dissident right for some time, and I really entered the dissident right, or at least its culture, like right about New Year's, like right when 2016 became a year, right when the current year stopped, so to speak, and became current year plus one. That's when I entered the dissident right. And from there, I got into like the early alt right. I was already into the Trump stuff for a while, and definitely into like revolting against online censorship. But I got into really looking into the philosophy of the alt right, and at the time, there was still some remnant of like neo 2013 to 2015 era of neo-reaction, which I'll touch on. So I got an early introduction to the alt right, or an introduction somewhere midway in the alt right, and a late introduction to neo-reaction. And eventually, as time went on, I kind of quieted down around the Trump election. Like I didn't do as much research, but as time went on, I got more into neo-reaction in 2017, and I became somewhat fascinated with its philosophy in this current year, like in 2018. Especially in the summer, I became much more fascinated with the philosophy, with Moldbug's gentle introduction, with the ideas that he was throwing around with the other writers of neo-reaction, and when it was more of a blogosphere. However, I I have all this knowledge of neo-reaction, or some of it. I'm not really that well read in all honesty, but I also have knowledge of the more lower end of things, you could say, the less ivory tower blogosphere and the more Chan, like the image board, like trolling culture, and to some extent. So I've seen kind of both ends. I've seen the high and the low. I've seen the more ironic and the more serious, and I've seen how these kind of intertwine. And I've also had knowledge of a less common subculture that some people know about, the common filth subculture, which is it sort of arose out as a rebellion to the way the alt right was going under, and especially like a cosmopolitan current within the alt right of tolerating Western like degeneracy, to use a harsh word, while still accepting ethno nationalism and stuff. So I'm familiar with some of the subcultures. I'm familiar with the image boards, the cultures. I'm familiar with a lot of the like bare bones like drama and history of the internet, like history of the internet drama, history of image boards, history of like the lower stuff, like the website raids and the more crass stuff. But I'm also more familiar with the like more ivory tower stuff, like neo-reaction. Okay. So I've just been fascinated by this the whole time as I've studied it.
So what is it that motivated you to study it, with the history of the dissident right and just neo-reaction?
First, my natural interest in it, and Secondly, and this is probably a close second, is the fact that there's not much on this topic. There's a pitiful lack of understanding in the public eye about it, especially in the public in the mainstream, where the alt right is a term commonly thrown around, but really nobody has any idea of where it came from. And also because the the work that's written on this topic is somewhat low in quantity, but also it had the current body of work that exists on this topic has some problems. There are a couple of books that I know of written on this same subject, the history of the dissident right. One's called "Kill All Normies," which Social Matter did some had a diatribe against, if you remember that, Michael. Uh, and then there's another one called "Neoreaction of Basilisk," the basilisk, the animal, the dragon. So, and they're both somewhat critical. I mean, Kill All Normies, I think, is a bit more of a objective look on things, but I'd eventually, if I do ever write a book on this topic, I'd like to read both of them just to see what I'm up against, or what's already been done on this topic. But the books out there are written by leftists, pretty much.
Sounds like a project you should embark upon.
And the third reason is just because this topic requires experience and insider knowledge. Not that I have the largest body of this myself, but just doing you can learn a lot from combining insider knowledge with internet research. And when people just try to combine academic, you can't really take a traditional academic approach to this. When people try to take an academic approach to this, you get some absolutely hilarious results. I can think of one particular instance, which is a scientific paper written about 4chan's politically incorrect board back in 2016, where they collected 8 million posts and started analyzing them. Basically analyzing a 4chan troll campaign from a statistical and scientific perspective. Not to say that their results were wrong too much, or they had some pretty fascinating results, but it's just kind of a hilarious way. If you tell anyone that browses the image boards that, then they're gonna kind of laugh at you. So you really need to combine an intuitive approach with an academic one, or with a more rigorous theoretical.
Okay. Well,
yeah.
How do you define the dissident right, and what exactly is dissidence?
Okay, so I came up with a definition of the dissident right because a lot of the terms that are thrown around, such as alt right, neoreaction, they don't encompass the whole of the sphere, this complex that we're trying to talk about. So the definition I've come up with is the dissident right is a primarily online intercommunicating complex of individuals and groups opposing at least one variant of egalitarianism and being united by a shared rejection of both liberal progressivism and establishment Western conservatism. So I've also relied on the insights of Free Northerner on Reaction Times, that website. He had a similar definition, but one that was in different words, and I don't think as extensive as this one, but I relied on a lot of his insights for this, just to give him credit. And yes, you mentioned what is dissidence. So dissidence is something that actually goes against the society and doesn't pretend to just go against the society, but actually goes against the society that it's in. So to give a good definition, a good example of dissidence, we'll turn to Scott Alexander. He wrote in 2013, he wrote an essay called Reactionary Philosophy in an Enormous Planet-Sized Nutshell. And in it, he made a distinction between two types of dissidence. So he described a society going in one direction. Like if a society has a definite ideological direction it's going in, there can be two types of dissidence. And the first type is that the society dissident saying that no, you're doing wrong. You should be going further. You should be going, further and faster in the direction you're already going in. And then the second type of dissident says, no, you should turn around and do something opposite. So he said the first type is rewarded. It's basically you're given professorships, you're given, you're called a bold revolutionary iconoclast. Well, the second type is you're actually saying the society should completely, fundamentally change its mind. And that's really what what gets at people. That's really what makes you lose your job or get sent to the gulag or whatever. So here's the thought experiment he gave for that. Mention that you think we should undo something that's been done over the past century or two. Maybe reverse women's right to vote, go back to sterilizing the disabled or feeble-minded. If you really need convincing, suggest re-implementing segregation, or how about slavery? See how far freedom of speech gets you. In America, it will get you fired from your job and ostracized by nearly everyone. Depending on how loudly you do it, people may picket your house or throw things at you or commit violence against you, which is then excused by the judiciary because obviously they were provoked. Despite the iconic image of the dissident sent to Siberia, this is how the Soviets dealt with most of their iconoclasts too. So that's what dissidence is. Dissidence, in essence, is what goes against the society it's done and what actually goes against. Like you could say, and the practical modern example of this is you could say, communists are dissident to some extent. They despise liberalism because they think that, we should be doing something far further. Still in a leftist egalitarian direction because egalitarianism is the framework of our society. But we should be doing it further. They're not necessarily despised. I mean, some people despise them. Trump would probably send his, make some law or he would agree with some laws that would, punish Antifa or something like that. But generally, they're not as despised as if you say, like, hey, by the way, we should be a white country. Like, if you say that, like, we should be a white country and deport all the blacks, that is dissidence because that actually goes completely against the idea of the society. I mean, dissidence is really what you say that makes you uncomfortable to some extent.
Yeah. Given I guess part of our peculiar history plays into that. People are a little, I think, naive as to like what happened in the rest of the world regarding communism. They have this like narrow focus, which is kind of linear on American history. So those were things that kind of affected us more here. So makes some sense.
Yeah. The reason that I define the dissident right in the way I do, in that basically it's everybody fundamentally rejecting at least one variant of egalitarianism or equality, in other words, is because that is the building block of our society. You can't take away equality from Western civilization without completely changing Western civilization. So as reactionaries, we tend to say that conservatives preserve yesterday's progress while progressives want more progress. The idea is that both of them at some level support equality and this idea of humans are equal fundamentally in one or more manners. And you can see this because today's conservatives, neocons, or just plain conservatives of the Republican Party they're never going to say anything against the civil rights movement, and liberals won't either. So to be reactionary or to be a dissident is to be exactly that, which speaks opposite to what both parties agree against. What both mainstream ideological trends agree with.
Would you elevate this to almost to like an unwritten law status?
In a sense, it's really going against the it's going against the groove that your society's already in, basically.
Yeah, because the letter of the law is technically on the dissident side, at least as far as rights go. But how much does that actually?
It doesn't really affect. If there's a shared culture that affects everyone in the mainstream, then no matter how loosely organized everyone is, they're still going to crack down on dissidence because it goes against their culture. Which is how we get the neo-reactionary concept of the cathedral.
Yeah. Okay. I did have a chance to look at those notes that you sent me before the show, and I saw that you split like a historical timeline into 6 different sections, one being prehistory, then the gathering, the primacy of neo-reaction, the growth of the alt right, post-election fallout, and post-Charlottesville. Can you briefly just kind of go over each point there?
Yes, I will add that for the purpose of this video, I'm gonna pretty much completely skip prehistory and give a summary of the others, but I'll describe them. I'll describe them briefly, all of them, including the prehistory right now. So the prehistory is from 1945 to 2005, and the reason 1945 is because it's the end of World War II, and World War II is that's the end of any order that resembles anything like dissident, or not dissident, anything dissident by the modern context. That's when the dissident right actually became dissident, because up until then there were fascist societies or things like that, or monarchist societies that people could really espouse these views in. But in 1945, at the end of World War II, at the beginning of the Cold War, around that time, there was a complete shift in the new world, like in the world order. You had basically the West, which was democratic, and the communists, which were revolutionary. But you didn't have any reactionary order. So at that time, the right became dissident. Some of the dissident rights ideas go back before this period. Like you could say of Evola, Julius Evola, and Oswald Spengler, who people still reference a lot in New Reaction, the Alt Right, and just the general dissident right as these theorists, these intellectuals that came up with a lot of the ideas that we still hold to today. They go back further than the prehistory, but the prehistory is really when the dissident right became dissident. So 1945 to 2005, and you see the formation of certain groups within Europe and America that are dissident, or remnants of previous movements that are now dissident. Next period is the Gathering, which is from 2005 to 2012, and this period is when everything, or is when all these currents really, all these groups formed an online presence. New groups formed, and at the end of this period, you had something that resembles the dissident right we have today. So that's why I call it the Gathering, because at the end of the Gathering, everything is gathered. Like you see a picture that's somewhat similar, or even in the beginning of the Gathering, you see a picture that's somewhat similar to what we have today. So the next period is the primacy of Neoreaction, 2012 to 2015. And I'm purposely leaving the years somewhat overlapping because these periods kind of shift into each other. So the primacy of Neoreaction is when basically Neoreaction went to a next stage and built the culture that the alt-right would sort of evolve out of, or built a culture that basically went through the whole dissident right and affected many people. And they sort of built the intellectual framework for a lot of things we would see later. The growth of the alt-right from 2015 to 2016, and this primarily has to do with the Trump election, which was the key thing in the growth of the dissident right, or the growth of the alt-right. So it really has to do with the Trump campaign from June, I think 16th, 2015 to of course November 8 election in 2016. And what we see there is a shift from a more like intellectual blogosphere to a mass populist movement of people that are a bit less erudite, but also a lot more in number and in energy, I suppose. Not that Neoreaction was low in energy; everything was high energy in that time. Okay, so the next period is the post-election fallout, and 2016, really the end of the election, to 2017, really to Charlottesville, or you could say that it keeps going to the present. That's basically what happened when the right said that, hey, we won, we got Trump in office, now what? And that's a very interesting period. And then the next one is the post-Charlottesville period, which, as everyone knows, last year, there was a massive rally called the Unite the Right rally. And this is mainstream knowledge, and everybody hates it. Everyone has bad memories of this rally, whether you're on the left or the right.
Never heard of it.
And and this was an entire game changer, historically unprecedented game changer. And that's why these periods are they shrink in duration when we reach the present, because so much has happened in the past couple of years. And the post-Charlottesville period goes to the present, so that's what we're in now. And yeah, those are the time periods.
Okay.
Do you have any other questions?
Yeah, the That gathering period, what was the impetus of that?
Like, what happened in it? What was the result of that?
Yeah, what and where did it come from? What?
Okay, so basically, the gathering came from. It came out of two things, primarily, or three things really. Um, the previously existing factions of the dissident right, the introduction of neo-reaction in its first phase, and the growth of image boards online. So many communities already existed within the dissident right internationally, and really in Europe and America. You had writers that were interested in human biodiversity, which is basically what we would call race realism. Um, and then there were Andrew Anglin from The Stormer, called the Old White Nationalists, which were they're basically the old American white nationalists after World War II. And then you had the Paleoconservatives, which were a movement, the remnant of a movement in the 1980s, I believe, around Pat Buchanan's with presidential campaigns. Then you had paleo libertarians, which were like more right-leaning libertarians inspired by like Murray Rothbard, Hans Hermann Hoppe. And then you had the European New Right, and that was a very and still is a very important faction in Europe. And they came up with a lot of ideas. So the gathering is where the new met the old. New ideas met the old ideas, but also a specific aesthetic was formed in which combines, which is again with this principle that we see occurring over and over again, combining the new and the old. A book as part of the European New Right, a book called Archaeofuturism gets this idea out, and I can try to pronounce this name. It was written by Guillaume Fay, and it was published in 1997, so before the gathering. But you see this common theme. I bring that up because there's a theme that you see in basically every period of this study of combining the new and the old, in aesthetically, but also in terms of intellectually in many dimensions. So a lot of these ideas had an internet presence. White nationalists had internet presence, HBD people, paleocons, paleo-libertarians. The European New Right started getting published in English around 2009, 2010 with Arctos Media. And the big game changer here was neo-reaction, though. So there's a person named Curtis Yarvin.
Never heard of him.
Many may know him as Mencius Moldbug, and he lives in San Francisco. He lived in that city all his adult life, pretty much. And he started a blog called Unqualified Reservations in 2007, and he made some money back in the .com boom, apparently, according to Thermidor. And this really kicked off neo-reaction. He created this blog, Unqualified Reservation. He wrote Unqualified Reservations, and he wrote a post called A Formalist Manifesto. And he just kept blogging and blogging, making so many concepts and ideas until, like up through 2009, he was really active. And some people started joining him as early as 2008.
Up until when?
And he started blogging up until 2009 very rapidly. He slowed down after that. He still blogged up until 2016, but up until 2009, he was extremely fast-paced in his blogging, and he wrote tons of stuff. So some other people started joining him, or sort of creating community around his blog. In 2008, as early as 2008, and then neo-reaction apparently became a term used in comments. And I heard one source I read said this. I don't remember if it referenced to a specific comment, but neo-reaction became, I think with a hyphen, neo-reaction, became a term used in a Moldbug comment. Neo-reactionaries became a term used by the economist Arnold Kling in 2010. And to describe Moldbug and his blogging community. And apparently, you mentioned to me, Michael, that there was a mailing list. Like, basically, in its earliest phase, neo-reaction basically in the entire period of the gathering, neo-reaction was just like a blog community around Moldbug and a mailing list. And the real importance of this community is that it united a ton of ideas. It united ideas from basically every other strand of the Dissident Right that I previously mentioned, which existed as its own faction and still does. Still, most of those communities still do. But it combined all these ideas. It combined the human biodiversity, the ethno-nationalism, the manosphere, but it also combined a lot of ideas from older books like Thomas Carlyle, and it basically they created their own thought, Moldbug especially. He even invented many terms for himself. And in this period of the gathering from 2007, 2008 onwards, Neoreaction became a very heavily intellectual culture. And by the way, credit to Nick B. Steves for giving a good summary, a good chronology of Neoreaction.
Never heard of him.
So, basically, Neoreaction formed a culture. One thing to note about Neoreaction is it wasn't and really has never been a strict ideology. Not like the Alt Right was, anyways, or ethno-nationalism is. It hasn't really ever been an ideology. A writer named Poseidon Awoke talked after this period of the gathering. He talked about Neoreaction being like a school. And then another blogger, anarcho-papist, or Bryce Lalibert, said Neoreaction was a culture of striving rightward, which is Poseidon Awoke said that was like the best description of it. So Neoreaction, in my view, it's a community, but it's also a culture. It's definitely a community. It's made up of people, and was from its very beginning.
Yeah, I think it's definitely been molding towards creating a more like an actual framework for an ideology. Maybe it's not quite there completely yet, but
yeah,
you kind of hit on one thing, because it seems like a lot of what Moldbug was trying to do was to encourage some really smart dudes to read some really old books that we might not have otherwise ever read. And I think that may have been more influential to the NRX movement than actually just his blog.
That's true. I mean, they basically created an entire culture. Like, it's not just something you read; it's something that you engage in. You basically let fill yourself.
Yeah, because in a sense, the community itself seems to have even taken some things that he said, and we're like, well, we read some of these books that you told us to read, and we think you're wrong on this.
Yeah, and that's a good point. So, Neoreaction wasn't it's not Moldbug. It's not his ideas. A lot of people took them and revised them later. But we'll get to that with the second period. I'll talk about primacy of Neoreaction.
Yeah,
we're still in the gathering.
Oh, we are.
So, okay. Interesting points about Neoreaction is that it was okay. So, it's made up of basically, according to YouTuber Reactionary Expat, he's now the Franklin, if you want to find him. He described Neoreaction as made up of basically post-libertarian class traders. And what he means by class traders is that they're the exact type of people, upper middle class, usually like computer programmers, the exact type of people that would work at Silicon Valley, and like basically you expect them to be arch progressives, but what did they do? They turned and started reading Sir Robert Fulmer's Patriarch or Divine Right of Kings. So they became basically complete traitors to their specific caste of people. And that was another Neoreaction idea, the caste system of the U.S. Like you had Brahmins and Amerikaners, Vaisias, or whatever you call them. Basically separating the idea of class, or getting rid of the idea of class, and analyzing people in terms of castes. And that was another thing Moldbug did. He just invented a lot of terms. So some of the other ideas he had were formalism, which is that the unofficial story, basically like the way decisions and power are actually distributed in a society should match the official story, which is definitely not the case with America today, but that it should. And sometimes, and it even blends into the next idea of neo-cameralism, which is basically a government is like a shared stock corporation, a sovereign corporation. And then the key idea to neoreaction, if there's one defining principle about it, it's really this anti-demotism, anti-popular sovereignty idea, which is that we reject democracy in all its forms, pretty much. Absolutism is another idea. We talk about absolutism sometimes. Absolute monarchy, absolute power in one person. Pacifism, that's the biggest idea. That's
We're
like the
gonna
ultimate.
We're gonna make America an absolute monarchy again.
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 Yeah, so if only it was at one point. Yeah, pacifism is that's like the alternative to activism. So if we're ever going to make America an absolute monarchy, we need to take we can't just go into the street and start protesting. We have to take a more sane route to it. And pacifism is really like asymmetrical warfare at a political level. So Modwick's thought just covered everything, all kinds of areas of interest, economics, absolute monarchy, all kinds of things. And as we discussed, he just made up so many terms, so that sort of created the culture. Another group that came up in the time of the gathering is the manosphere. The three primary bloggers, which some people call the three.
Can you say that again?
The manosphere. Yeah, so the manosphere became a group that came up in the same time, the gathering, alongside of Neoreaction. And there were three primary bloggers still to this day that are essential to the manosphere. So Rush, Rollo Tomasi, and Royce. Rushby, that is, I don't know how to pronounce his name.
Pickup artists?
Well, they covered many things. So they're pickup artists, there's game writers, there's sometimes there's people that are more like, MGTOW oriented. It's just the manosphere is like anti-feminist men that want to actually exercise masculinity, and they're trying to figure out different ways to do it. Some more, chaotic and crazy than others. But this group is very important to the dissident right, and we'll see that later. And then you have the image board culture. So, namely 4chan. There were other image boards around, and 4chan came out of something awful and image boards before that. But 4chan basically forged in the latter half of the 2010s, or 2000s, my bad. 4chan forged a lot of the early culture of the internet, and there were two boards, New and Poll, which came about in 2010 and 2011, respectively. New shut down and became Poll. And they were cultural engines of the dissident right. New is news, I believe, and Poll, politically incorrect. Basically, they became like the groundwork, in some sense, a place where all kinds of dissident ideas could be discussed, and people could find the reaction, the manosphere, all kinds of ideas like basically intertwined with them. And we also have some notes about the early alt right. So what is the alt right? Well, the alt right really didn't exist up until like practically 2014, 2015. In terms of the mass movement, but the term existed at least since 2008. For Free Northern, the blogger found search trends for alt-right on Google going back to at least 2004. 2004 at the very latest, if not earlier. But the term alternative right was, I think it was alternative right, was coined by Paul Gottfried in 2008 in Baltimore, actually, Michael, I believe. And so alternative right became the usage that he used it. He also coined the term paleoconservative way back when, Paul Gottfried, that is, and he used it in a way that's similar to how I use dissident right today. In 2010, I believe it was that year, Richard Spencer created the blog Alternative Right, which popularized the term some more. But that basically the alt-right didn't exist as like the formal mass movement. If the term was used, it probably was used to reference the dissident right or some ethno-nationalist trend of it, as I define it, that is. So so that's basically it. We see all these, we have Neoreaction, the manosphere, the chans. We see all these groups, they form and they're intercommunicating because the reason you can tell they're communicating, not just by reading the blog posts or modebugs referencing the manosphere or things like that, but you can tell that because they all share the same ideas, and usually ideologically similar people tend to find each other, especially when there's an image board involved. So, do you have any questions about that period, Mike?
No.
Okay, so on to the next one, the primacy of neoreaction. Basically, neoreaction, up until now, it existed as like a blogosphere mailing list, but not much more. It didn't really have a huge culture around it. In this period, it basically takes off and becomes something entirely new. So the beginning of this is when British intellectual Nick Land, someone who's like big into classical philosophy or continental philosophy, and he had ideas of accelerationism. We'll get to that in a second. He has a very interesting history, but he discovers the new reactionary community, and he's like, whoa, and he writes an essay on this. And the essay is called The Dark Enlightenment, and it was written in late 2012. It's probably like up with Moldbug stuff. It's probably at the level of like neo-reactionary canon, if that's a term. Blogs. He blogs about neo-reaction on his blog Outside In Xenosystems, and really there's not much activity until 2013. So he finishes that essay in late 2012, but in like things really start to kick up. There's this thing that Nick Lang called the Cambrian explosion, which adds all like so many in like 4 weeks. So many bloggers come up, and instead of organizing around Moldbug, they organize around Nick Land. And by this time, Moldbug still writes, but not as much. He really declined after 2012.
What you kind of cut out? What time period was this?
Time period of Moldbug's writing, or time period of
You said something about somebody forming around Nick Land.
Oh, this was like springtime 2013.
And who was this? Was this like a formalized group?
These were a few bloggers. It still had the very blogosphere form that the first stage of neo-reaction had with Moldbug, but Moldbug at this point stopped writing a lot. So a lot of bloggers came and formed around Nick Land, and of course Nick Land was reading Moldbug stuff and referenced that in the Dark Enlightenment and all that. But so Nick Land collects all these bloggers around him, and basically he shifts the center of neo-reaction from Moldbug's Unqualified Reservations, which is becoming dormant, to Xenosystems, his own blog. And he calls it the Cambrian Explosion, which was a 4-week period in April and early May that added Nick B. Steves and Michael Anisimov and the entire More Right community, which came from More Right was a community of people from the rationalist site Less Wrong that entered into neo-reaction because they were kind of edgy and they liked these ideas. They like to discuss ideas that couldn't easily be discussed around Less Wrong, the more progressive types.
Nick B. Steves edgy?
No, I'm talking about More Right.
He's a boomer.
I'm talking about More Right. So Michael Anisimov was their leader pretty much, and they created, they came out of a blog called Less Wrong, and they created a blog called More Right, kind of as a jab, I guess, and many meanings. So anyways, from basically that time on of springtime 2013, neo-reaction just steadily increased in popularity. And people, like basically a blog community has formed a blogosphere of neo-reaction greater than anything that was in the previous period of like the 2007 to 2012 era. At this point, neo-reaction becomes just something quite huge. Or not huge necessarily, but something very large, like much, it's growing a lot, intellectual. And this is when you start seeing people start critiquing Moldbug's ideas a lot. So, as you mentioned, like they read books and they kind of question things. A few interesting concepts that I need to touch on with neo-reaction. The trichotomy was something Nick Land used to describe the neo-reaction in this period. But basically, try to say that neo-reaction was a trichotomy. You had like 3 different types of people, or 3 different currents of thought that some people fell in like one or more of. I think Nick Land had the idea, according to E.A. Gray, I think, that he had the idea of separating the groups, like you're the ethno-nationalists, you're the theonomists, you're the techno-commercialists. But the idea was that there are three groups: the theonomists, as I said, ethno-nationalists, and techno-commercialists. Basically, the theocrats, those focused on like religious unity, those focused on ethnic unity, and those focused on like futurism, as capitalism, you know, authoritarian sort of futurist systems. And all of these, again, the theme of combining the new and the old, the theonomists and the ethno-nationalists are the old, the techno-commercialists are the new, and it created a very unique aesthetic in like, you know, people started loving, you know, ancient like 400-year-old absolute monarchies, but they also started liking Singapore of the modern era and Hong Kong. Nick Land lives in, I believe, like Shanghai or Hong Kong. And Nick Land's thought, you know, he was kind of somewhat of a futurist himself. He had this thought of accelerationism, of speeding up capitalism to completely like accelerate the collapse or change society or bring about a technocratic order. And then he had all kinds of ideas. He was interested in horror, and Moldbug was interested, it seems, in H.P. Lovecraft, and so he had this weird like aesthetic come in with you know, Lovecraftian chaos. So Moldbug's thought is still hugely influential, and basically people just kept making new terms. You know, you have all kinds of terms come up. Like you can make an entire like glossary of Neoreaction. There's a few on the internet, or at least a couple I know of. So as Neoreaction became more popular, their ivory tower culture merged with the more like postmodern image board culture, and again, this creates the combination of the new and the anyway, so back to more history about Neoreaction. So those are like their ideas and the aesthetic that came out of them. Neoreaction saw more media coverage starting in the late 2013, November, I believe, and continued from there. And you had an article called Geeks for Monarchy by Clint Finlay, I believe, TechCrunch, I believe. And then you had another one called, he had some very critical articles on it, like mouth-breathing Machiavelli's Dream of a Silicon Reich. They were pretty funny stuff. After the media coverage begins, Neoreaction has an impact on the tech elite. Pax Dickinson, which you mentioned, Michael, some time ago, that you were talking about. I think he was a chief financial officer of Business Insider. So like pretty big people started taking interest in this kind of things. And then you had one changing event which threw off everything. And this is like the first step toward paving the way toward the growth of the alt right. This is called Tranny Gate. So effectively, some transsexual named Justin Tunney, who I believe worked as a software engineer at Google, created a White House like petition, like a whitehouse.gov petition to replace America's president and its entire government. Like basically, it's like straight Moldbugian thought. Like retire everyone in the American government, replace America's president with the absolute like monarch of or the CEO of Google. You're still there, Michael?
Yep, here.
All right, sorry. I heard some noise about sound like Skype. So basically, replace America's entire government with Eric Schmidt and have him do everything. And so people are like, oh, wait a minute, this person's espousing Neoreactionary ideas. That's kind of cool. But then other people are like, this person's a transsexual. You guys really like supporting this. You know, it's like you have to be like, you're reactionary. You can't just be supporting like the most like, you know, socially revolutionary ideas or socially revolutionary type people. Like Justin Tunney worked in Occupy Wall Street before, so there was this whole controversy over the role of Justin Tunney, and some people like took a step back and they're like, you know what? These people are arguing over what Neoreaction is for. Is Neoreaction supporting this, or is Neoreaction completely like getting rid? You know, we hate this altogether. So they said, you know what? Neoreaction is like sort of a loose culture, right? There's no real order in it. Nobody can come up with even a list of ideas that we all hold in common. So let's create the Hestia Society. They created a society basically that would eventually come to basically rule Neoreaction.
Never heard of it.
And what happened was they acquired projects under themselves starting in 2014, and at the same time around Trenegate. So you had Social Matter, the news website, which is still very popular, Ascending the Tower, the podcast, and Reaction Times, which was donated by Free Northerner. It's like an aggregator of all kinds of reactosphere dissident right blogs and websites. Anyway, so as Hesty was collecting all these projects, you had this movement come up starting in August 2014 called Gamergate, and this is huge because it's just wildly influential with not only the dissident right, but just with the entire internet in general. So basically, some people, it kind of came out of the chance. You had this thing called the conspiracy theory, and there was this game developer, Zoe Quinn, who was kind of into social justice and all that. And people were questioning whether she had a relationship with like basically behind the doors romantic relationship with certain games journalists. And basically it started this whole like campaign against, unfortunately, on Reddit in its earliest days, but it started a campaign against what they saw as the corrupt games journalists industry. And because they thought, game developers are just getting are just paying, doing favors and all kinds of stuff to the games journalists so that they could get good reviews on their games. But really what this was, it was also a proxy war against, or not quite even a proxy war, it was a war against like the social justice encroachment on every single hobby, comics, video games, you name it. So eventually, a few weeks after that, Adam Baldwin coins Gamergate as a hashtag, and the actor, that is Adam Baldwin, which is kind of weird, but it's kind of cool. He coined the term, and the movement organizes around what I already said. Anyway, so some tragedy happens at mid-September, and 4chan, like the hotbed of all dissident right activity, and especially the board's V and poll, video games politically incorrect. 4chan's admin goes to see Anita Sarkeesian's lecture, and Anita Sarkeesian is one of like the feminists that Gamergate's enemies with. And shortly afterwards, I believe he saw this was a famous lecture of her. Either way, he was at some sort of convention where these people were at, and what happened was he and the moderators, unfortunately, completely upset. Like, 4chan's like the site of no censorship. Like, you can, it's kind of anarchic. You can post whatever you want. Now suddenly you're cracking down on a movement that's just getting off its feet. And, that seems to have some personal interest with you, they were saying. So anyway, 8chan, which was a previously insignificant website, came up as an alternative, and that became, another cultural hotbed of, dissident activity. So Gamergate, ultimately, it's not an explicitly right-wing movement. There was a law I heard about called, I believe, O'Sullivan's Law, which was, if something's not explicitly right-wing, it will become co-opted by the left over time. And Gamergate was basically that. It became more centrist, more class. It started out from like the Chans and from people like Internet Aristocrat, or Mr. Medicare as he's known today. People more right-wing, but it became sort of centrist over time. Apologized to its opposition, kind of cooled down on its zeal. And it had some victories. It cost Gawker some ad money, and got ad companies to pull their ads from certain websites that were like doing the things Gamergate was against. But mainly corrupt journalism, and it really declined by the time November 2014 came around. Nevertheless, it just completely threw a bunch of people off their feet. It got a lot of energy around this anti-social justice idea that was previously not as popular, but it basically just kicked up the energy around the anti-social justice mentality, even among the not right-wing people, just among leftists and centrists and libertarians and conservatives, just in general. Created a lot of memes. You get the idea. So people are like, I just want to play video games. You know, social justice warriors are ruining my hobby. So, anyways, in short, Gamergate died out. It still sort of existed as a group, like people still united around the label, but it really kind of died out in its Twitter hashtags and HM posts in general. So, anyways, during this time, Neoreaction continued to grow. It took interest in Gamergate, along with the rest of the dissident right. You could say that Gamergate caused a lot of people to perhaps want to enter the dissident right. Anyways, so 2015 comes around, right? Moot leaves 4chan, the admin, Christopher Poole, and 4chan gets a new admin. So then you have the Neoreaction that says you have the Hestia coup, which at the end of May 2015, Hestia Society basically said, you know what, we're done. We're taking Neoreaction. This has gotten too chaotic, out of control. You know, we're basically the gardeners of this thing now. We're the moderators. We're gonna purge this. We're gonna make sure things stay in balance while still letting things go, kind of be free. They released a post on their website at the time, and basically everyone in Neoreaction agreed with it. The timing was pretty well planned, or not planned, but it just happened to be that way that really all the leaders of Neoreaction, the cultural leaders, tend to agree with it. But one leader, Michael Anisimov, who was the leader of More Right, he had some online drama, and basically he lost a lot of reputation among people. And that was like right before the Hestia coup anyway. So basically the Hestia Society proved itself to be the only leadership of the whole situation. And not to say that there was nobody against it, but nobody could really mount such an organization that the Hestia Society had. Anyways, so Neoreaction concludes by the time of Trump's presidential announcement, a month later, Neoreaction's centralized completely. Or, centralized. It still exists. Many blogs have shut down by this time, by 2015. Some will still keep going until 2016, but you really see kind of a death of the blogosphere culture as the years turns into from 2015 to 2016. And you also see an upsurgence of populism. A couple other points I wanted to mention. In the same time of the primacy and Neoreaction, you see the Iron March forums, which is like a fascist forum, appear around 2012. And they try to get a solid fascist worldview going and, get people intercommunicating. And then you have the rightstuff.biz, a website still popular today, very popular, which played a lot of role in the early alt right. And they came up, I believe, around 2014. And as I said, you basically had the whole social justice, debacle. People hated, Gamergate mobilized a ton of people. This is just in the broader internet in general. Gamergate mobilized tons of people. Then there were some controversies on Reddit in the summer of 2015, which caused a lot of people to, censorship on Reddit, caused a lot of people to revolt against the tech industries and also social justice, and mobilized tons of people for the Trump election. So then we have the rise of the alt-right. Populism grows, right? So as we said, you have Gamergate, you have the Reddit rebellions, you have all kinds of things. You have the Trump campaign especially. Those three things really mobilized a lot of people. And also the chance of a bunch of high school kids that browse 4chan are kind of, really enjoying this kind of stuff. So, and, the 4chan is basically a hotbed of dissident right activity. So you have the alt-right appear, and the alt-right begins as what Nick Land said, the populist dissident right. And it really had a big tent nature early on. Some people try to deny that, but the term was used in such a manner in which to denote all kinds of different ideologies, even some things that I wouldn't consider dissident right, like civic nationalism. So a hotbed of activity, as I mentioned, for the alt-right was the rightstuff.biz, the website. It was a forum, a website, and a website full of podcasts, that is. It was also somewhat Big Ten early on, but they became more ideologically centralized around, ethno-nationalism. And that you see in the general alt-right, it becomes more centralized around ethno-nationalism. Iron March had some influence on it, but their influence was kind of like suppressed by the staff of the site in the beginning of 2016. So Iron March had a lot of influence in fascist groups like the infamous now Atomwaffen Division. It's infamous because it got co-opted, but that's a different story for later. Iron March had some influence, got suppressed. The podcast increased in popularity in 2016. Well, really the entire time of TRS. The two main podcasts were Fash the Nation, which was focused on the Trump election a lot, and it was a bit more detailed, talking about practical steps to get Trump in office. And then The Daily Show, which was a parody of The Daily Show, was basically sort of a jokey, like much more channel-oriented podcast. Anyways, in springtime 2016, some people took issue at especially one person named Common Filth took issue at the the cosmopolitan, as my friend put it, nature of TRS. And what that means is there's this term racist liberals, like basically people that support or that are more or less fine with homosexuality and a lot of the more socially left-wing things, but really want their country to be white. So Common Filth was really started to attack them for that, and became generally a dissident figure of the dissident right. Like he became sort of dissident toward the alt right, and he focused on virtue and Christianity, and he's a very interesting character. His podcast was all about looking at the worst in Western civilization, trying to make sense of it. I listened to him quite a lot back in those days. Anyway, so the rise of the alt right in this period, there's a saying that Trump had, high energy. That was this period. It was just there's so much going on, so many activities, so many podcasts coming out, just all kinds of activity. Everyone was sort of free, high energy, a lot of laughs. You had the TAI, the Microsoft's Twitter artificial intelligence, the account that they set up, and then 4chan quickly turned into a Nazi that would identify everyone. That was hilarious. And then you had the Trump just being a troll in his campaign and the Can't Stump the Trump videos and all of that. You had Hillary's speech where she complained about the alt right and wrote an article about Pepe the Frog, and someone in the middle of Hillary's speech he yelled out Pepe. So I have a friend that, and many people called it, after this period was over, many people called it the halcyon days, that common phrase, unity. This period was like very united. It was just everyone was working together. Everyone is united around, as Michael Anisimov put it, the tribal leader of Trump. You also see another force, and I mentioned this, but that the general, the alt-right moving from a big tent term to a much more ideologically centralized term. Like that means they focus more on ethno-nationalism. If you're in, you're a white nationalist or ethno-nationalist. If you're that, you're in. If you're not, you're out. And Davis Arini, later in this year, he critiqued it. He called that heresy, and he means in the sense of the word, like the essence of heresy. What is heresy in a Christian sense? What is heresy? Heresy is it's the focus on one idea, the exaltation of one idea, and you put it above every other idea and subordinate, like put every other idea in service to it. So the idea in the alt-right, this heretical idea in this sense, is ethno-nationalism. They just took that, exalted it above everything, and then read everything else through it, which is why you get Common Filth and people critiquing them, saying, hey, like, you guys are, you're tolerating sodomy if it's white. Like, you get the idea. So, basically, yeah, they moved away from being the populist dissident, right, to more almost a brand, like Richard Spencer's brand. Not quite that far. I don't even think it's gone entirely that far up to this day, that term, but it's become much closer to that.
Yeah, I kind of remember quite a bit of tension between like Neoreaction and their response to that too. Like there was quite a lot didn't seem like they were certain as to whether to like align with these people and work with them or to just shun them completely. It was like they weren't quite sure what to do.
Yeah, well, in the early days, and like when the alt right was the populist dissident right, yeah, we can kind of like go along with this. It's really cool. It's fun. Michael Anisimov called the replacement of neo-reaction of the alt right a good thing. You know, neo-reaction centralized and declined in activity, while the alt right grew in activity in this time. But yeah,
I don't know if that's necessarily accurate as.
I mean, in terms of the broader picture, in terms of who controls the culture of the dissident right, it was definitely
Yeah, I
like
mean,
the
maybe
populace.
like the public activities of, I guess.
That's really
I
what I'm
guess,
referring to.
yeah, yeah.
The cultural appearance and image boards will dominate the post, all that. But yeah, neo-reaction was definitely alongside this to some extent. But yeah, I can see the question because our social theory, like the intellectual nature of neo-reaction, or the blogosphere nature, the intellectualism isn't really compatible when you have a movement that seems to be steadily decreasing in its intellectual, basis.
Yeah, and when you, especially when you get more toward, like, if you read Moldbug and you get into what his plan of action is basically for the restoration,
Yeah,
it becomes rather evident that this isn't something that can really remain just out there, um, kind of in the same sense that the alt right is. Does that make sense?
exactly. Yeah, the alt right just took a much more activist approach. Kind of, it was just a bunch of a lot of it was just online trolling. Um, and that was effective. That was very effective.
I've never
Oddly
done any
enough.
trolling in my life.
But it was a lot of energy in that time. And yeah, it definitely wasn't pacifist, though. We can say that for sure. I mean, yes, we were still rooting for Trump at the time. Everyone was rooting for Trump at the time. But then, when Trump got in, that's when we commenced the post-election period. A weird thing happened. Like I don't know how much people were expecting Trump to win. I really don't. But when Trump got in, nevertheless, everyone's like, "Wait a minute, we just won." Everyone on the dissident right's like, "We just won. What do we do now?" And Andrew Anglin, said that after that point, a type of depression set in, which is kind of weird. But if you really think about it, Trump being the tribal leader, as Anisimov said, if you lose the tribal leader, the tribes start fighting each other because there's no unity with them. And the tribal leader just got in power, but now everyone's trying to figure out what to do on the ground. So,
well, it's because revolutionaries never stop being revolutionaries.
Yeah, true. So the halcyon days basically ended, and then you have Hailgate, which is a funny story. Everyone knows Hailgate. Richard Spencer raising the glass at NPI. I think this was a few weeks after the election, at a conference I believe in DC. He raised a glass of water on the table, and or at his podium, and he said, "Hail Trump, hail our people, hail victory." And at that point, a lot of the people that were more like civic nationalists, there was this division already in the alt-right from months before that time, the alt-right division, like the civic nationalists and the ethno-nationalists. A lot of people that were in the civic nationalist category were like, "Wait a minute, we can't support this. This guy's being like a Nazi or whatever." So they had to say no. And then the alt-right basically said, "Yeah, we respect your exit. You're the alt-right," and they respected that term too. "We're the alt-right, and you respect that term." So basically, they created a formalized division that both sides agreed on.
Yeah, I'll say some people in the crowd didn't even know really that, like, people that were at that event didn't quite understand the nature of it.
Yeah, it's kind of.
And then, of course, the Atlantic, who were there, just character, they threw some people under the bus just for being there. But
Yes.
whatever.
So then, in the same time, you have the two big, everyone knows about these things. Pizzagate, the that the Chan started saying, like, if you go through the emails, I believe, in WikiLeaks, the Podesta emails, was it? I don't even remember too well. But if you go through these emails, you find some really weird terms talking about like, and people talking about like cheese, like pizza and like this pizza shop, and people thought they were trying to say child pornography or child trafficking. So people got really suspicious about that, and they started creating. It was a very sort of big event in the dissident right that those theories were took hold, and people were became much more skeptical and sort of antagonistic to the ruling class, the deep state, basically. And then the fake news, basically after the election, around the election,
Fake news.
people started blaming Trump for like, what do you call it? People started blaming Trump for, or blaming certain sites like on Facebook for promoting fake news. Trump elected, and then Trump basically flipped the term back on them, and they started calling like CNN, "You're fake news." Like, I think it was that. So it's kind of a term used both ways. And it kind of was a term originally from the left that got caught on and flipped by the right. And that was just like, those are the two big things: Pizzagate, the Comet Ping Pong Pizza Shop, and all that, and then the fake news. Those two. Those were the big events.
It was Russia, of course.
Yeah, the Russian. Yeah, I forgot all about that. Yeah, Russian bots, Russian hackers hacking the election. Yeah, they're still going on with that today. It's like there's almost like this immortality of the late 2016 period. Like, all these things never left. Like Pizzagate kind of left the public debate, but fake news never left. That term still used tons, and the Russia never left. Russian hackers, that never left. So there's this immortality of the inter-election period, like when Trump got elected versus when he got inaugurated. Anyway, so in early 2017, the term alt right became like a brand name, and almost more like a brand. It became, basically, formally speaking, what happened is that the alt right became more ethno-nationalist centric. Like,
just white
became
nationalism, basically.
Kind of, yeah. Like it became more of a term that very much, like, you can't really be Big Tent alt right anymore by the beginning of 2017. There were still some elements of that in 2016. You can still have like kind of off ideas, but the alt right basically became more, in Areni's sense, heretical, as I described earlier. And I think there was the alt right news site. There's a corporation founded in early 2017, which sort of formalizes the alt right as this, like, almost like a brand.
And I don't even know that alt right is a good descriptor for them, because they're pretty liberal otherwise.
Yeah, so that's another point. Like, they actually started having not just like the ethnocentrism, but the ethno-nationalist centrism, but they had a almost like a political platform to them. Like, you could start. I've seen many lists online. I have a whole folder full of them. Like, you can go through the bullet points as to, you can write like an ordered list for the positions that the alt right holds, which is a very interesting point. Like, you could say like, oh yeah, we're kind of environmentalist, or we don't like.
We support abortion except for white people.
I don't know if they all, like, at large took that so far, but that's sort of the racist liberal thing.
Richard Spencer definitely does.
Yeah, I don't think that term could speak for the entire alt right, but that definitely speaks for those, like, what we call racist liberals. I love that term. So,
well, Richard says that he coined the term. I think he claims that he coined the term.
Alt right.
Yeah,
I talked about that earlier. Well, he created the blog in 2010, but Paul Gottfried got there before him in 2008, as far as I understand. And then people were searching about it before then. So
maybe he didn't. Well, he
popularized it. We can give him credit for that. There was still some energy, left over in the dissident right, after the inauguration. Like we talked about the depression hitting him, but it wasn't like full on yet. There's still tons of fun being had, especially when Trump got inaugurated. You know, resist, and then the "He Will Not Divide" a Shia LaBeouf campaigns where they chased him all around like Europe and America. That was those memories. Like 4chan used the airplane contrails and the stars and the beginning and endings of days to try to pinpoint the location of a specific flag on the planet Earth, and they found it and they went there and then they took the flag down and put up a MAGA hat and a Pepe shirt. Yeah, those days, those are actually like there's still some energy left and a lot of laughs to be had. A lot of fun. Then he had some more laughs that were they got a bit more serious as later on. He had some rallies and street battles. The first one was the Battle of Berkeley. This was the first one that stands out to me. You know, it wasn't just an alt-right thing or a dissident right thing. A lot of people just went there in general. And like, you know, more like civic nationalists, Proud Boys, the more alt-right distinction. You could say the liberals, I guess. I don't know if that term applies to those who went there, but basically some people were trying to go there and talk, and Antifa was there, and they basically turned into a big street warper battle. And it was hilarious. And the right won eventually, I believe. And then you had this is not well known, I don't think, but you had Charlottesville 1, which was a rally in May. The Charlottesville we all know, I call Charlottesville 2, and many people call it that officially. But Charlottesville 1 was a rally that happened in May, and it was very successful and very well planned, actually. They didn't have any scuffles with Antifa until I believe the night that it happened, or the night. It happened in an afternoon. They had a rally at the statue, the same place the second Charlottesville was planned. They had a rally at the Robert E. Lee statue, and then they left and I guess gathered somewhere, and then they came back with tiki torches, and they paraded around the statue. And since they planned it so well and secretly, Antifa wasn't there until like right at the end, and there were hardly any of them. And that was an interesting rally. It was like the success of Charlottesville, but it was like probably a 10th or a 15th of the size of the second one. It was like probably around 100 people. 100, 200, maybe even less than 100. So, anyways, then we have Charlottesville 2, right? And you know, the energy is kind of declining. There's sort of a lot going on. People are still trying to like reconcile the alt-right identity. You had a big event that happened in the spring, which is when Trump. What did he do? Did he send? That was when he sent missiles into Syria, right? That angered a lot of people in the alt-right. So you have this idea of the Trump, and it's not only no longer the tribal leader, but he's actually starting to be questioned by people on the right, and that continued up until our day. You know, remember the Trump missile strike?
Yeah,
that happens like it's like a yearly Trump missile strike at this point. Like every year around the spring, Trump has to send some missiles into Syria.
Yeah, because I remember when he won, I was relieved mostly because the rhetoric coming out of Hillary led me to believe that we would have World War III because she would escalate things in Syria, and then that would get Russia involved. And then so when Trump did that, I was kind of like, well, I mean, I didn't vote because I'm a reactionary, but I felt kind of stupid for being so excited that he won. If that makes any sense?
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, I definitely shared in that feeling when that happened.
Yeah, it just pervaded everyone. Like, oh, our president just won, but wait a minute, he's now a neocon. Like, I don't think like there were different levels of reaction to that. Like, he's a neocon traitor. He's a puppet of the Jews, of the Zionists, whatever. And then some people are like, let's give him some time at least. And then some people are like, you know what, I support my president or whatever. So there were different, like, and then the 4D chess meme that keeps happening, you know. Trump's just playing 4D chess.
Nick
like,
Fuentes. Yeah.
Like, there is this idea that, like, Trump's just some master strategian thinking, like, 20 steps ahead of the game, and he knows why he's doing the missile strike, and it's only some part of master strategy.
Stormy Daniels.
It really depends on how much faith you want to put in.
That was 4D chess. Stormy Daniels was 4D chess. Let me tell you.
Yeah. So then we have let's get to the big stuff. So August 2017, Charlottesville 2, the Unite the Right rally, the first one. basically a massive, much larger than the first Charlottesville, a massive rally was planned, and it was, a ton of right-wing people, just in general, just all kinds of right-wing people. Anyone who wanted to go, I suppose, would go down there, and they would, they would protest, and they do the same thing about Robert E. Lee. They, protest at the statue. They do Tiki Torch March. So they had a rally, and they began, I believe, I think the first part of the rally was at night. It was August 12th or 13th. I believe August 11th to August 12th, or August 12th to August 13th, 2017. Very infamous rally. So the march at night was kind of successful. Like, no, there wasn't many scuffles or whatever. There was some kind of, clashes sometimes, but they just had tons of people, and they really kind of struck fear into the hearts of their opposition. Because there you see like 1,000 people with tiki torches. Like, that's kind of a big sight. All with white polo shirts and saying stuff. Didn't they say like 2 seconds of Jews will not replace us, and then that got recorded on the media, and they're like,
they were really chanting, "You will not replace us."
Yeah.
And then there were like two blokes in the back that said, "Jews will not replace us," and they happened to be right next to the media, and that's what you, yeah, that.
Yeah. So this rally, like, you had all kinds of people. It was a unite the right, so you had all kinds of right-wing people. You had hardcore nationalists. You had probably not that many reactionaries. I don't know how many reactionaries went, because pacifism, we kind of have a systemic immunity to this kind of stuff.
We had no participants. We had a few observers.
Yeah, it's good to observe. It's not necessarily good to participate with our pacifist strategy. We kind of have, this is part of the reason Neoreaction was not the big partaker in the forming the alt right culture, or it kind of formed it intellectually. It wasn't the forefront of it, because we can't be the forefront of an activist culture while we're pacifists. That's the reason. Another reason, I should say. The other was FD society centralization. But anyway, back to Charlottesville. The daytime was a disaster. So the night march was all right. The daytime was a disaster. So what happened was, as E.A. Gray told me, the police used a civil rights era tactic, which was funnel the protesters right into their opposition. So, basically the right-wing people were sent straight into the Antifa. And you can imagine what followed. A lot of violence. Then someone named James Alex Fields took a Dodge or something like that. He took some car and drove through a protester, like a street square of Antifa protesters, or drove into them a little bit. And one woman, Heather something, died. An Antifa protester died because of something. I don't even remember. But that was like these evil Nazi right-wingers murdered
Heather Heyer.
Yeah, so basically these evil Nazi right-wingers murder, and the entire cathedral is like, as we talked about the Neoreaction, one of the concepts is the cathedral, for viewers who don't know. And the cathedral is like the shared culture that I discussed earlier, that all institutions can share. Basically the shared mindset that a lot of people have, even if they're not working in unity, or working in organizational structure. There's no specific head of the media, the academia, the bureaucracies. There's no one conspiratorial head necessarily, but they all seem to be agreeing with a lot of the same opinions and doing the same stuff.
Even though the facts are, all the violence was instigated by Antifa, and the reactions, all that was showed was the response to the instigations, the instigators. You saw they showed the response.
So yeah, it was just a mess. However much like Antifa did, however much the violence Antifa had, it was not shown, or it was just the story was just that right wingers, just evil right wing Nazis, killed people and attacked people and caused tons of injuries. And basically, the alt right was portrayed by and large as this just evil Nazi skinheads, basically nothing more, nothing intellectual. And part of the reason I make this project is because you really have to understand the history of the alt right, that they weren't that original. They came out of something completely different to the skinhead movements of the late 20th century. And another event that happened in the daytime was a helicopter crash. I don't know how many people remember that, but there was some police helicopter that crashed outside of Charlottesville.
I think that was eventually determined to be just an accident.
Yeah, I don't know. There were kind of like Chan conspiracy theories about it. You don't know how reliable all of them are because they just jumped the gun. A lot of it, but people were coming up with interesting ideas about the helicopter crash, that like it was a gasoline Hollywood fire instead of a normal plane crash, explosion. Regardless, I just bring that up because it's a detail. It's not very significant. Many people were in prison. That's very significant. Christopher Cantwell among them, the libertarian nationalist. And yeah, basically, Millennial Woes did a video called "The Cathedral Stands Up," and that's basically right what happened. Like we had unprecedented levels of internet censorship for the first time in history, probably. We had a website, a political website, get basically taken off the internet because of its politics. The Daily Stormer, Andrew Anglin, Andrew Arnheimer, Weave and Andrew Anglin were basically all kinds of stuff happened. I believe Millennial Woes said that Wee's bank account was shut down. Like his Bitcoin accounts was shut down. His bank account, like all kinds of, like we talk about the cathedral, like being all this sorts of separate organizations and like mine. You really saw that concept come to play. Charlottesville was like a proof of Neoreaction, basically, in all of its concepts. Like the Daily Stormer, the website got kicked off of like over 30 different domain names, and that they really haven't settled on domain names until they got to dailystormer.name, and that happened like, I don't know, 8 months after Charlottesville, sometime around there.
How ironic is this? Antifa and the alt-right show up to fight, and who wins? Neoreaction.
I mean,
not even
there is a sense in which you can win by not engaging in stupid things. I mean,
it just proved pacifism. It proved our theories as being superior and more effective than what they're doing.
It proved that we didn't suffer the backlash from that. It proved that we didn't suffer the same loss that everyone else did. Which that's one thing. That's a good thing. But there's a sense in which we need to like also move forward. We'll get to that in a minute. Basically, just everyone freaks out after Charlottesville. The entire, like, anything you can imagine, everyone's hating right-wing opinions. Everything, almost every organization that has anything, not where that doesn't even have anything to do with it, starts hating right-wing organizations. Like, we talk about internet censorship. I mentioned that Reddit had an uprising in 2015, a couple uprisings about censorship. Basically, from that time onward, just ever increased. And when 2016 happened in the Trump election, it really increased. And around the Trump election, because they just lost, so they have to kick back in other ways. And then Charlottesville happened, and that was like the last straw in some sense. Now everything's just completely gone. Now we have the post-Charlottesville period. So I mentioned the period I was just in was the post-election, right? And I'm wrapping it up here. So basically, as I mentioned, the alt-right identity just kind of lost appeal. Like the mainstream lost, they already didn't know what they're talking about when they're talking about the alt-right, but now they even knew less of what they're talking about, because if you look at search trends, they were only introduced to it really twice. Like the largest search trends for the alt-right were when Hillary Clinton spoke out about it, and when Charlottesville happened. Those were the two times. The two largest times. I mean, there were other spikes, but nowhere near as large as these. Many people just kind of gave up. Like there's a Twitter group called the Irony Brewers, which are people kind of from the dissident right that share the same ideas, but are just like, you know what, I'm done with politics now. It's too depressing. let's just focus on self-improvement, and make jokes and things like that. So we talked about a depression happening after the post-election period. Charlottesville was like the finalization of that. Like if you doubted that we were in a depression before then, Charlottesville was the depression. It was the end of that, or the beginning of that. If you wanted to, if you doubt all depression before Charlottesville, there was depression at Charlottesville. It was a loss. Everyone says it was a loss, initially at least. Many people don't regret going, but many say it was a loss. I heard a take from a friend that said that after Charlottesville, people will become more moderate or more radical. You can't be the alt-right in a vague sense anymore. You have to be, one or the other direction. It was a very polarizing event. So that really, I think that take was correct. I mean, it was a prediction you said at the time, but I think that take was quite correct. People became, more hardcore nationalists. You saw groups like TWP come up. You saw, Atomwaffen Division, which grew to popularity kind of because it was co-opted by Satanists. That came out of Iron March originally, and it wasn't co-opted by Satanists originally, but then it became like that. You saw these, people join hardcore nationalist groups or become, zealous reactionaries or whatever. But then you saw people like move towards just conventional conservatism, Trumpism, paleoconservatism, especially. Nicholas Fuentes, you could call him a paleoconservative. And he attracted a large following after Charlottesville. He gave an analysis of it. He said basically this was kind of he kind of expressed a lot of grief people had. And he got popular because of that, because there were many people that were grieved because of optics. That was a debate that came after Charlottesville.
Well, they were terrible.
Yeah, well, the optics was basically, the concept was, to some extent, you have to look presentable to the public. And that's a very activist thing to think about in some sense, because activism is all about winning the people. It's a very democratic idea. And in order to win the people, you kind of have to appeal to the people. So
probably don't wave Nazi flags.
Yeah, and you can debate, like, people are saying like the Feds showed up there and like in American Nazi Party uniforms and all that, but the optics debate came out, and then some people were like more, a lot of the more hardcore nationalists tended to reject it, and some people took a middle ground, and some people were just like, I'm kind of done with this altogether. But the optics kind of went into a dichotomy between just let's just still dress badly at rallies, but not wear Nazi flags and Roman salute. Like, it became that.
Yeah, I think at Alt Right or Unite the Right too. Sorry, they were only allowed to have American and Confederate flags.
Yeah, they had kind of an optics police, and that was. Yeah.
For all 20 people, all 20 people that showed up.
I want to end on that because it was almost a hilarious victory. Not a victory because of what happened, but a victory just because it was like that, because Sky King and because the plane incident of Richard Russell. And
well, it was funny. I mean, I was there.
Yeah,
there was like thousands of Antifa showed up for these 20 alt-right guys who basically jumped out of a van, gave speeches for like 30 minutes, and then hopped back in and left. And there's just like Antifa there, just wanting to fight, and they couldn't fight anyone.
20 people just trolled the entire country. It's nonsense.
Basically, that's
it's hilarious. But anyway, so you had the optics debate, which was. It turned into more of a dichotomy in some sense, I think, between people that really despise the idea of like policing optics and people that were, more toward policing optics. I kind of don't like too much to think in dichotomies. I mean, ideally, if you are rallying in the streets, if you're even doing that at all, do it in like uniforms or something, dress uniformly at the least. Don't wear t-shirts and, like have LARPer costumes where you have shields of black suns. I mean, it's funny. It's really funny, and it's kind of that Chan mentality. but at the same time, it's kind of it's kind of a mess at the end of the day. Like there's not much professionalism in that. But then again, you can debate that maybe we shouldn't be rallying the streets in the first place.
Yeah.
Pacifism. But
I think we
anyway, so
let's start to wind down here. We're
yeah, I'm about to be done.
Um,
any questions about that time?
No, I was just gonna say, just gonna move on a little bit. The Alt Right kind of become a household name after all this, while Neoreactions lurked in the background a bit. Can we move on to kind of what are the differences between the two?
Yeah,
ideologically.
Neoreaction and the alt right they're not comparing two the ideologies when you're talking about that. You're actually comparing two things that are quite different in nature. The alt right at this point, like I said originally, was kind of like a more Big Tent-ish, or to be informal, but formally speaking, it was like more just a populist version of all opinions of the dissident right. Well, the reaction isn't like it's a group of people. It's a group of people that do things and blog online, things like that, and traditionally has been. But it's not an ideology. The neoreaction.net website, which is pretty much the description of it, how it is now at least, says it's a political philosophy and an intellectual movement. So yes, it is a culture in some sense, as anarcho-papist said. It's a culture, as he said, of striving rightward, but it's a culture and a school. And in a school, people can have different ideas and they talk about it. In a culture, people generally are united by common things, but they can have sort of unique individual manifestations of that. And right now is like it's become ethno-nationalism, and to some extent it's kind of been divided and consumed over time after Charlottesville.
The alt-right, right?
Yeah. So the alt-right is like, it is comparing apples to oranges, but you mentioned the alt-right is a household name simply because it began as a populist thing. It's always been a populist thing. It always sought to be something mainstream, and it did. It became mainstream with Hillary Clinton, with Charlottesville. People are still trying to keep the brand alive, and as much as that counts as the ideology, the difference is that neoreaction is not a unified ideology, really. There's a lot of shared concepts, there's a lot of shared theory behind it, but it's really too big. You can't put it in ideological terms. You can't say this is what we believe. You can say, here's Moldbug's gentle introduction, read that, and in the next week, or at the very earliest, and here's Thomas Carlyle's latter-day pamphlets.
Well, I think that neoreaction, I mean, I don't think that's completely true, because they have I think they've at this point probably developed a goal and maybe streamlined their thoughts and ideas into a plan. And then otherwise, if they don't, there's no way for a restoration of society to occur. They need to come up with a plan and a solution, and then sell people, the right people, not in a populist sense, but they need to sell the elites or whoever they need to sell on the ideas. That way they can implement it peacefully. And there's a plan out there.
Yes, there definitely is a plan, and if you read Moldbug's gentle introduction, the last 3 parts of it, the last 3 chapters, if you're reading the ebook, that talks about the procedure. And I would agree with you there that there is a procedure. And really what's happened, I think, is neoreaction's undergrown almost like an evolution. Like you had the early blogosphere, and then you had some growth of it in the Nick Land's era of 2013 and onwards. And that really was like the next step. And that step produced the Hestia Society and, centralization. And now we're talking about working inside centralization.
Which I guess really, for us, there's no way to really, looking at from the outside, there's no way for us to really be sure exactly how that's working.
And that's part of the plan, in all honesty. Because as like, I think I don't know if it was Moldbug that sent this, but in some sense it's better. Like he talked about one of the advantages of pacifism is you're completely off the radar. I mean, unless people start hunting you down for your ideas themselves. In some sense, all the action is taking place secretly. Nick B. Steves described Neoreaction being not so well known anymore is almost a good thing. But the thing is, and that's part of the reason it's backdoor. It's backdoor because it's centralized, because it's been replaced by populism, because fundamentally it's anti-populist. It's never going to play the same game as the alt-right was playing. And backdoors, though, you need quality people. That's really what Neoreaction needs if it's going to be successful. And Moldbug mentioned that, like, mentioned the difference between an activist blog and a pacifist blog. An activist blog wants as many people, and in his day things were more, blogosphere oriented, of course. An activist blog wants as many people as possible to read it and have some effect on, right, or to be affected by it. A pacifist blog wants quality people, and it's not concerned about the quantity, but about the quality. As long as you get the right minds with the right zeal and the right will in the right place, all working together in a monoblend unity, then you can do some pretty amazing things. Thomas Carlyle mentioned that, I don't know the exact quote, but if, like, even the smallest of creatures, when they unite their entire will on one thing, they can accomplish great things. But a larger creature who has like a completely divided mind, a divided will, cannot accomplish as much. It's completely scattered. He used the analogy, it's like imagine a drop of water on a rock, and just a continual drop, like it's just one drop at a time, continually falling from the spigot. It falls on the rock and eventually erodes the rock in a hole. It drills a hole through it in some sense. If you just take the same amount of water and dump it on the rock all at once, you're not going to do anything. So effectively, Neoreaction, in order to keep alive, it can't do nothing. That's a common thing about pacifism, is people confuse it for doing nothing. It's not doing nothing. It's a very complex thing, but it needs quality people. And the alt-right, in order to stay alive, needs quantity. And to some extent has that, but I think it's declined so much in quality and in, order, and its halcyon days are over, that in effect it's becoming nothing. So especially now that it's somewhat of a brand name, and you can't get the Richard Spencer identity out of it too much, or that group of people,
Yeah.
So depending on people like Richard Spencer and his gang of the type of people that you traditionally see at the top of the alt-right, then so be it. Then people like that, and they don't continue going. But if there's no quality of mind, if there's no intellectual basis in there, if there's no unity of action, if everyone's just throwing themselves at street rallies and not accomplishing anything, they're never going to get anything done. So that's my final notes on Neoreaction and the alt-right. I can add a few things about what's happened at the last, like, in our present period, if you don't mind.
Go ahead.
So in the alt-right, we talk about after Charlottesville, everything was kind of chaotic, and the alt-right's kind of completely shaken by this. People were trying to be unified, but they're not. And one big thing that they were doing before, in the pre-Charlottesville period and the post-election period, is they were hosting, like, I think Richard Spencer would go to universities and talk and debate, and they would host conferences at universities. They'd host rallies in places, and basically after Charlottesville, they're completely shut down from doing that. No university is going to help hold these people or allow them to dialogue. Maybe they did a bit of that. I'm not entirely sure, but it's definitely declined. And Anglin noted that, Andrew Anglin. But one group that was doing something was Traditionalist Workers' Party, and Matthew Heimbach and his group, and they were much more nationalist. Kind of united a lot with the more fascist nationalist mind, and And they did a lot of street rallies, but at the same time, people complained about like their lack of optics, their lack of quality, or whatever. And eventually, there was in-group drama and things like that that shattered the whole thing apart. So
Drama?
I don't want to talk too much about it, but um, I mean, to some extent, drama needs to be talked about if we're studying the dissident right, because like you can't study Neoreaction without studying, what happened in Gate, for instance. You can't study Gamergate without discussing the Zoe Quinn and the conspiracy theory. But I don't want to go too deep into it because it's kind of depressing.
Depressing?
You get the
It's
idea.
hilarious. Well, not really. But.
So, you had certain people carrying up the energy, but as I said, people aren't of the same mind anymore. People are trying to be unified, but they're not. And this brings us to our present. You see a lot of like weird groups come up. You see people on Twitter, oddly enough, agreeing with a lot more Christian ideas, and perhaps I think that's a good thing that's come out of all this chaos. I think Colin Firth has like he kind of declined activity after 2017. In 2017, he completely stopped doing his podcast, but people started somewhat agreeing with his ideas afterwards, maybe not even knowing that they were his ideas or that he spouted these ideas before. And then you have like the Pine Tree Twitter, the anarcho-primitivists. There's a big like Ted Kaczynski push, like that's become a meme. You had the Atomwaffen, like in the time of Charlottesville, and before then you had James Mason's Siege, which was a big nationalist fascist read. Kind of ironic. It's become a meme. Some people don't like the tactics discussed in it. In some ways, it is pacifistic, but that's a different topic. The common notion of it is somewhat different than what it actually says. But you have the in this summer, particularly in the past summer 2018, you just have some hilarious things happen. You have Unite the Right 2. Basically, everyone's disordered and confused. That's really what the post Charlottesville era is. Everyone's completely is kind of lost their mind. And you have the Pine Tree Twitter. You have the big thing that happened was Sky King, and I think this is a good note to end on. You know the story of Sky King, like Richard Russell, and basically right before the Unite the Right 2 rally, everyone was preparing for it. Some guy, not even some like dissident right guy, apparently he had like a Groyper Twitter account or something like that. But he had the Pepe. He was like a baggage worker at an airport in Seattle, and he stole a plane. He just completely flew off.
Yeah, I remember that.
He flew off into the sunset and did like he did it like something aeronautically impossible barrel maneuver, and people like romanticize. He was like the romantic like figure of the dissident, or just everyone just loved him. He was like the romantic hero, the revolt against the modern world personified. And basically what happened is, so he did that right before the Unite the Right 2 rally, and everyone's attention was fixed on him, so that nobody really cared about the Unite the Right 2 rally, which was still kind of a massive success just because they kind of just, in a sense, trolled the entire country and didn't suffer any consequences for it because the DC police was in the way.
Yeah, they did a good job. DC police kept everyone safe and separated.
They did, yeah.
Which in my video from that still hasn't come out, but that's because we focused a lot of attention on this book that we'll be publishing.
Is that the Bowl of Tears and Solace?
Yes. Yep. Which is written by Garth T. Ogle, who none of us know. Just kidding. He was on the show a couple weeks ago. But yeah, that book will be debuting it at Doxicon in DC on November 2nd. So it's coming up real quick. And then I have a whole slew of produced videos that are just waiting to be produced and then released.
So that book will be printed or just available as an ebook?
It'll be hardcover, softcover, and ebook.
I think I'll try to get a physical copy of it.
You should.
Anyway.
You should come down for Doxicon. Well, it's too late to buy tickets now.
So
But
do you have any last questions about my summary? I mean, that was kind of a long summary, but this topic is just too big.
That was good. We went 44 minutes over time. So, but thanks for coming on, Clark, and maybe I can bring you back on sometime. We can talk about, kind of expound on some of these little side topics here.
Yes, or maybe we could talk about. I don't know. I've had some various thoughts about what do we do now in our time? Like we study the history that inspires the present. So what steps ought we to take in the present? Because
Well,
in some sense
I'm writing a book about that.
we could write we could focus entirely on the reaction, but to some extent we have some relationship with the broader dissident right. So yes, we should focus on the reaction because that's who we are, but and that primarily definitely. But what should we think about the rest of the dissident right? Should we just let them go off into chaos, or should we try to like not just offer advice or whatever, but try to order things?
I think the best thing we can do is kind of like what we're doing with like at my channel here, kind of espousing reactionary views towards that audience, and hopefully some of them will kind of latch on to that and maybe get a little de-radicalized, so to speak. I don't know.
Or radicalized, depending on how you see it.
Well, we're like the epitome of not being radical in a sense, because
but also the epitome of being radical.
We are obsessed with obeying the law. So
I mean, as a means to an end, yeah.
Yeah, so I don't know that we're radical. Radical implies
oh yes, not radical in like an activist sense. Radical in an intellectual or ideological sense.
Yeah. So, but when I say radical, I kind of think of Allahu Akbar. So, but hey, thanks for coming on, and we'll chat next time.
It was a good show, Clark. Michael, thank you for having me.
You're welcome. See you. All right. Well, isn't he chatty? We only went 47 minutes over time. But hey, it was a good discussion, and I hope you enjoyed it. If you did enjoy it, please hit the like button, share this video, subscribe to our channel, and hit the notification button. Also, please consider supporting our Patreon page, which I will have in the comment section. That way we can continue to keep bringing good content, and we can get our produced videos out at a more regular rate, because we can have some help with some money. So anyhow, see you guys next week.